Have a good morning. I know if you're like me, this daylight savings time really messes with your mojo. I already feel late. Even though it's still dark outside, I feel like I'm late. My internal clock has not caught up with the new time yet. But anyway, today's verse of the day from the Bible app comes to us from the book of Matthew, Matthew 6:19. And it says there, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, not on earth, where moth and dust will corrupt, and thieves and robbers will break in and steal. So we know without a doubt that when it comes to any verse in the book of Matthew, we know it's kingdom oriented, so kingdom related. So part of living and being a part of God's kingdom here, we know, is to figure out what to put our time, energy, money, and effort in and what not to. And sometimes that's hard. I wonder if there's certain things like, as far as you don't want to hoard up or whatever. There's certain things that maybe you kind of wonder about, because the idea here is that we invest wisely in things that are eternal, and not so much the things that are temporary. The idea where moth and dust will corrupt, that means that things that time will basically erode, tear down, go away, and it is sad to think, like, you probably have a part or an area in your city or your town, just like we do, where you can go down a street and you see these old rundown houses, and you can visualize more like when that street was new, and when those houses were just being built, and they're probably built all about the same time because they look very similar, how beautiful and quaint, or how nice that area must have been. But now it's just run down, nasty looking, and and you can tell where some people maybe have tried to fix up or remodel, but it just didn't happen for them. And it's sad to see that. And I wonder if there are some things in our life that look like that, things that we have held on to that are more of this world than they are of eternal nature, and it kind of looks like that for us. I don't know what that would be. It could be that very well the things that we just try to keep, the things that we try to hoard up. And I know it's hard to decide those things. I know that what the Bible's talking about is investing my time in knowing Jesus, and investing my life into my family, to leave a legacy for them, a legacy of faith, and to teach my children and lead my wife and my family in the ways of God, to be incremental and a participant in the ministries within our local body, within the church, within the community. I know those are the things we're supposed to be doing. And so we do those things. And but then, when I look at Jesus and we say, okay, what did Jesus keep? Well, first of all, Jesus didn't have a home. He slept outside. So, you're like, well, is it bad to have a house? I don't think it's bad to have a house. But Jesus was just the extreme. He volunteered to be homeless. He just went from place to place for 3 years. He had no money, because remember, he told the disciples, even when they went into a place, like, don't take this and don't take that. So I'm assuming he probably had one change of clothes, no money, and just kind of went day by day. And so if we look at the example of Jesus, I don't think that he's telling us to be exactly like him. I think that's more descriptive, as far as like the way that he and the disciples lived. But I do know that for me and for you, it's probably very hard to sometimes decipher what to keep and what not to keep, what to lay up in store and what not to lay up in store, because I am number one for saving things that I might need later. And ironically, oftentimes I do need things later, that I haven't thought about in years. But I know where it's at, and I know where I've kept it at, and when I need it, I'll have it. And so I don't know if that's part of it or not. I'd have to really think through that. But I do know that the overall picture here is this. When we accumulate multiple things, it takes away from the one thing. Okay? When we accumulate multiple things, it takes away from the one thing. And the reason I say that is because the word here, I know, for treasure is like thesero or whatever, but it's where we actually get our word thesaurus. That word translated is thesaurus. And I use a thesaurus all the time. I love I used to keep one, like an actual book of thesaurus, but now you can just go online and I just type in synonym for, whatever word. And I do that mainly, especially when I'm teaching a lesson or coming up with, and I want to say something a different way, or I want to find a different word that maybe will communicate the same thing, but it will communicate it to a different group of people. And so I use that all the time. And so I find it fascinating that here the word is, it's not, when it says treasure, I think because of my context and maybe yours, when I think of treasure, if I think of images, the first image is this treasure chest dug up from the sand that some pirate left, centuries ago, that has gold and jewelry and stuff from all over the world in it, and just, and it's buried somewhere, but you pull it up and it's just worth so much money. And so that's kind of what I think when I think about treasure. And not that that's totally far from what it's talking about, but it's really about the accumulation of many things, as opposed to like focusing on the one thing. And that one thing is Jesus. And, the bottom line is, and it's the same thing with kids, it's the same thing with any relationship. The more that you have of things, the less you can concentrate on one or two of those things, because you got a lot of things. So it's almost not so much, the part of this is like an emotional, attachment we might have to stuff, but it's also very practical in that if you want to focus on Jesus, okay, and you want that to be your go-to, if you want to focus on that relationship with God, then everything else that you acquire in your life that needs attention will take away your focus of Jesus at that time. Now, I'm going to, a very practical thing, not necessarily but a very practical situation would be, okay, so I have several kids, so therefore at our home we have several cars, and most of which I have to work on. About once a week, maybe twice a week, I have to work on a car. Now, because we have multiple vehicles, and they're all old, and I'm looking for another one, by the way, but we have multiple vehicles, and so like this past weekend, I did about a couple hours work on one, and then later in this week, I'll do some more work on that one. Then I have a whole nother one I need to get to. That's not an emergency right now. The first one is it has to be done. So because I have multiple cars, right, I can't just focus on one car, you see? And also because I have multiple cars, every time that I'm working on one of those, it takes away from me spending time with my family, or doing something with them, or anything you have to, that moth and dust is corrupting, that's falling apart, that you have to maintenance and do with, takes away from the things that you really desire to do. Now, I'm not saying it's sinful as far as separating you from God for having those situations. The point is that this is a very practical scripture. It's not so much, it's a very practical way of being in the kingdom. And that if you want to spend time with Jesus and you want to know him, right, then you can't have multiple things that have to take your time away, because they have to be constantly kept up with and fixed, and and then trying to secure them so other people don't take them, is kind of what the scripture's saying. And if you want to look at it even even a more very, very practical way, if Jesus is going to be your first love, you can't have another love that compares to him. You know, it's the old, I guess, scenario, or I guess allegory you would use, or story you would use, where like if a guy says to his girlfriend, hey, you know, I love you and I think things are great, but, you know, I think I'd like to have, you know, like maybe another girlfriend, just not as serious as you, but just have that. Is that all right? Like, no girl in her right mind is going to be like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. That's like infuriating. You know, that's saying that, that so many things, that would be a funny, conversation, I think. But that's kind of what this is talking about. Also, it's a very practical thing. If Jesus is your first love, you can't have a second love. You know, now you can love people and have family and all that kind of stuff. That's not what it's talking about. It's the fact that like you can't even, there's nothing that should even be coming close to like the time and the effort and the energy and the thought that you give to Jesus. Anything that comes close to that, like there's some misprioritization. See, you think about Jesus's priorities. He like, even on his way, I heard a speaker say this the other day, I'm not sure who it was, but it was like, Jesus did more on his way to do the big things than you and I have ever done in our life. You know, like he was just so focused, and everywhere he went, he was doing ministry. His thoughts were on serving God and bringing glory to God and bringing glory to the Father. And that's the mentality that we are supposed to have, because Jesus, even going to the cross, did not waver at all. He did not go do something to get his mind off things for a little bit. He hit everything head on, straight on. And I know he was perfect, but in that comparison and understanding, like laying up for yourselves treasures in heaven, the things of this earth just didn't mean anything to him. You know, it just didn't mean anything to him. So he didn't depend on it. So we want our dependence to be on God, not on the other things in this life. Not that we can't plan and do things that are smart. We don't just live by the, you know, willy-nilly by the seat of our pants, so to speak. But you think about Jesus in the way that he, even though I'm sure that like the disciples accumulated funds, and they did, you know, we know that that people gave them money to get from place to place. They had to have it to live. The person that Jesus put in charge of that was the guy who, as far as we know, never placed his faith in Jesus, and was also dishonest, and he was a thief. And so you see that, like, if Jesus were in that ministry and he was dependent upon the accumulation of funds to continue that ministry, there would have been areas of ministry that would not have happened, because Judas was, we find out that the Bible tells that Judas was stealing parts of that money. He was pocketing money for himself. So we have to realize that the most important things in this life are the things that we invest our time, energy, and money in, and that we can't be just dependent on something else for our happiness and for our direction and for our joy. It has to come, that source has to come from Jesus. Now, how you work that out, the only advice I have for myself and for others is, you know, if something's in question, just say, God, point out the things in my life that qualify in Matthew 6:19 that are treasures I'm laying up on earth, right? And help me to lay those down, or not necessarily lay them down or do away with them, but reprioritize them in the right way. Because God, I know without a doubt that you are the ultimate treasure, right? You are everything. You know, again, this word is like thesaurus, is like a treasury, a group of things, you know. So God, you are everything, and everything else is secondary in this life. And if there's anything in my life becoming like even close to that dependence I have on you, if there's something else I'm depending on this earth as much as, or even close to what I am on you, Lord, help me to reprioritize that and do things the right way, because I want to be active within your kingdom. God, I desire to follow in the footsteps of Jesus the best that I can, for the purposes of being obedient and finding joy in you, but also in my accountability and my responsibility to my fellow believers on this earth. So that's just some thoughts. That's all it is. Just think about it. You guys have a good one, and we'll talk to you soon.